Thank you, and thank you all for coming today. As she said, I'm Kevin Naverto, and I'm the advisor for the Political Activist Club. And first, I'd like to introduce our panel members and allow them to give a brief remarks, and then we'll open it up for all of you with questions and comments. So we actually have 3 Moraine Valley students who will provide personal accounts on the importance of higher education for them personally. We have Karina Lopez.
Hello, everyone.
We have Jesus Benitez. And we have Joshua Mira. And we have Brenna Conway. She's the Illinois director at the Roosevelt Institute. She's responsible for growing in Illinois based on student network and working to involve students in both writing and enacting policy changes at the state and local level. In 2014, Brenna orchestrated the Next Gen Illinois Project, which brought together thousands of young people in person and online to create a youth policy agenda for the state of Illinois. And directly to my left is Representative Kelly Burke. She's represented Illinois' 36th district for the past 5 years. The 36th district includes 7 communities in Moraine Valley's district, including Evergreen Park, parts of Chicago Ridge, Oak Lawn, Palos Heights, Palos Hills, Palos Park, Willow Springs, and Worth. She's currently the chairperson of the Higher Education Committee and works on 8 other committee and subcommittees. She's one of the strongest advocates for higher education funding in the General Assembly. She's filed amendments, veto overrides, and pushed for legislation specifically to fund MAP grants and funding for community colleges. Please join me in thanking and welcoming our panel members today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Karina so she can start.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Karina Lopez. I just want to give like a brief preface of who I am. Well, I am majoring in political science here at Moraine Community College. I'm the eldest of 3 children in my home. I'm the first in my dad's side of the family to go to a community college or college as a whole. Which makes me as a role model for my family, since I am the oldest of, for my own siblings and for my cousins, that I was set to put an example for everyone else in my family to go to college. So what I want to go forth is how going to college was a challenge for me, knowing through my background as ethnicity, I am Mexican American, which for that, there's a lot of stereotypes involving with it, since most of people my age, now girls in my age, they are focused more into just staying in home, cooking dinner, started to developing a family, but I never chose that. I actually wanted to go forth with my education, and it was hard because a lot of my family were like, no, your role is to pretty much go forth and being a housewife and not furthering your education. The only thing that you need is just to learn how to read and write. But in my mind, I was like, no, I did not want that for my life. I want to further my education. I want to be something later in life. I want to pursue in the career which I want to pursue in, which is law. And that's pretty much what made me decide, you know what, I need to go to college, and that's my decision. But furthermore with that, there was a couple of challenges that I had to go through financially. Both of my parents, with their income, both of them are low-working middle-class family, which is pretty hard on them because throughout my high school, it was hard for them to pay for my fees for high school, since in our suburb, they charge pretty much like $300 each year, which is hard for my parents to pay for me and my brother, which both of us were in high school, and we always struggled to pay for our education throughout high school. And throughout almost my last years in high school, I had to think about further on in the future that knowing my family, I know they weren't going to help me at all throughout my schooling when I furthered my higher education. So I had to think through for a bit because I did want to go through a four-year university straight after high school, but to myself, I was like, you know what? Community college is awesome. It's affordable as well, which made me decide that I wanted to come to Moraine Valley Community College, which was one of our community college in our district that, that I decided, you know what, I'm gonna give it a try. And I love Moraine Valley Community College. It gave me the opportunity to join so many clubs, a variety of many activities that we have in school as well. And for me, coming to college was one of my biggest dreams and one of the things that I wanted to provide as an example for my family to continue further on. I didn't want to stop just in high school and start working or staying at home with my family, with my brothers and sisters and my parents. I wanted to further on. So for me, stepping forth, going to college was one of my biggest achievements for myself and for my family. And also furthering on, I felt like Moraine Valley, with so many wonderful things that we have, I would hate to see, our fundings going down for our school, which is something that pretty much a lot of our students need, for example, our writing centers, which is one of the most amazing things that our school has, and I would hate to see that being cut down. So, and also one of our wonderful clubs and activities, I wouldn't like to see that being cut down. I would just love if that kept continuing, because that's what brings our school the best of it. That's what brings our college the amazing aspect of it. So thank you for hearing me, and we'll pass on.
Okay. All right. I'm the second speaker. My name is Josh Ramiro. And a little preface for me, I'm 19 years old. I'm a double major in journalism and political science, which isn't doing too hot these days. So I definitely need to come here. But as I was growing up, my parents, they were both immigrants from the Philippines, and along with myself, us three were the first Americans in our family until they had a divorce. Now, the divorce didn't break me up as much as it did my mother, but the amount of baggage that sometimes comes with having come from a relatively broken home life sometimes doesn't afford people the ability to expand upon their horizons as much because they have more responsibilities at home. As for me, living in a single income household, we had a very difficult time affording basic luxuries, let alone trying to go off to a big four-year university. So when it came time for me to graduate during my senior year of high school, the only real options that I was faced with were going to community college or being sunken in debt because my mother's single income couldn't afford the tremendous amount of money that's required to go to a four-year. So at first, I was a little miffed about having to come to Moraine, but over time, I realized that coming to Moraine was probably the best decision I could have made. And it was one that I made on my own because I still had the option to go to other universities, but I chose to come here because it's a fantastic resource for people who may not have the luxuries that others may have, and it provides world-class education as well. Because of this, I decided to come to Moraine, and I support community colleges everywhere because they allow people who don't have the advantages that others may have to get an equal chance to rise above what they were before so that they can go on and become what they want to be. As she mentioned before, the writing center at this college is absolutely fantastic. As well, for me personally, the library staff here is wonderful. They are very helpful, and they can get you almost any literature resource or any resource in general that's available. Computers, listening equipment, AV, whatever you need to do what you want to do, they can obtain. And at some of the other colleges and for your universities around the area, that isn't an option because they either require you to have a fine to just check out the equipment, or people just aren't allowed to go to them in the first place because they can't afford it. So the fact that this institution is threatened by recent economic burdens placed upon the state is a horrible thing because it's potentially robbing so many other people of what their futures could be like. All right. And with that, I'll hand it off to Pete.
What's going on today, everybody? Now, I'd like to ask a question. And what exactly is opportunity? Well, to me, it would be the chance to really advance forward, whether it be emotionally, financially, or any other advancement that you'd want to get. If you asked me a couple years ago, back when I was about maybe a sixth grader, I couldn't tell you any of that. I was kind of your standard delinquent growing up. I got suspended, I got plenty of detentions, and I personally really didn't care much about education. But it wasn't really until 7th grade that I took a pivot point where my father was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I had to make a very important decision about my life where I would either just continue and mess around as I would, or I would buckle down. And I said to myself, hey, if I get a good education, then maybe one day we can afford his treatment and potentially save his life. So it wasn't until that year in 7th grade where I completely turned my grades around. They went from D's and C's to straight A's. And my teachers really took notice. They're like, wow, you really switched around over there. And yeah, I really didn't feel comfortable telling them all this. So I pretty much kept it to myself. And it wasn't until 8th grade where, I got perfect straight A's, and I was really searching for that opportunity to really advance myself forward. Moving into high school, I kept that same mentality. I kept that same drive. I kept that same passion. And I really wanted to just get as much of a good education as possible and really seek that opportunity that I've always wanted. Unfortunately, sophomore year, my father passed away, and that's when everything kind of went a little south for me. I still remember that day. Very tragic. But at that moment, I remembered that my grades may have went south simply because it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And all the motivation that I had going forward, trying to find whatever opportunity I could to advance my family forward, economically, finding a method to pay for his treatment. All that was just gone because my prime motivator was gone. My father was my mentor. He was my first teacher. And for all that to be stricken away, it was very difficult to rebound from. But then I took a look around. I took a look at the family he left behind. I took a look at my little brothers. I took a look at my mother. And then I remembered that he's an immigrant. My mother's an immigrant. They came here looking for that opportunity. They came here looking to advance forward. And whether my older sisters, who are immigrants as well, they never had the opportunity to file for a FAFSA. They never had the opportunity to move on to a big university, even though they tried really hard in school. I was the one that had that opportunity. So then I took another gut check. And I said to myself, it doesn't end here. It does not end here. So I continued to move forward. Rebounded my grades, and that was actually the first C I've ever gotten in high school. But moving on, really striving to just find that opportunity. And eventually, I graduated fourth in my class, got plenty of prestigious scholarships to many different universities, and I was excited for life. I was excited, I was motivated. I still remember getting a ridiculous scholarship, half off tuition, and all this, all that. And my mother thought that that was the end of it, where we could finally just relax, I would move on, and we could live happily ever after. But you have to really see things financially at that point, where I didn't let the scholarships and all the opportunities really kind of cloud my vision, where I would still have to pay about 20 grand per year for me to attend, such and such universities. And I said to myself, even with public funding, even with grants, that's still money that my family simply doesn't have. So I took a hard look at myself and I said, not yet. Not yet. Looked for the best opportunity that I could. Then I found Moraine Valley. Tuition's cheap. Heard that it's really good, and it really has been amazing. It's been an amazing experience so far. And it doesn't end. Still taking the opportunity. I know that I still have the potential. I still want to be an electrical engineer. I still want to advance my family forward. And even if I'm working, and even if I'm still at school, still waiting for that opportunity to really advance my family forward. So when you cut funding for public education, that is a ridiculous insult to people like me, to people like you, to all of us in this room who would like to advance forward, who come to college for that opportunity to move forward in life. But as of recently, it looks like tuition rates only go higher and our funding's being cut. Is it an opportunity only for the people that can really afford it? I don't think so. We all have potential. We all want to advance forward. That's why we're all here in this room. Let's not waste that opportunity and continue to move forward. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brenna Conway. I am the Illinois director for the Roosevelt Institute. And first, I just want to say thank you so much for these stories. I think they deserve another round of applause, actually. Those are fantastic. The stories that you're sharing here, and that I assume many of you in the audience as Moraine Valley students have of your own, are also very similar to stories that we hear from students across the country. So Roosevelt Institute is a national organization. We're a nonprofit organization that works with college students on about 130 campuses across the country. And we're really unique because what we do is we allow students to work on ideas that they think are going to improve their campus or their community or their states. What we're trying to do is inspire young people to use public policy and think about their power together to get involved in that process, and that they have you have great ideas right here. So, for example, we all have these stories. We've heard from numerous students across the country the importance of education and higher education. And fundamentally, what we believe is that young people can be a part of that process of help redefining and shaping the policies as we go forward that's going to help make the situation better, whether it's right here at Moraine or for the state of Illinois or for any state across the country. just want to talk a little bit about the work that we've done over the last 2 years, and also give maybe a little bit of background information about some higher education funding that we've watched happen over the last couple of years in Illinois. I know that part of this event is designed so that you can sort of catch up and learn a little bit about that process, and maybe think about how it's impacted you in the past and what you'd really like to see in changes moving forward. So we have been operational here in Illinois for the last 2 years. As was said earlier, in 2014, I helped host a convention that was called Next Gen Illinois. And the whole idea was to bring college students and high school students and young people generally from across the state to think about what are some of the biggest problems impacting the state of Illinois, and what do young people think would be positive solutions or positive outcomes to changes we could make there. And education, no surprise, was the very top of the list. Both K through 12 funding and also support for higher education, and especially making higher education attainable for everyone or affordable for everyone, a possibility for all students in the state of Illinois that are interested in that path. And so we held caucuses or in-person conversations with maybe 60 different schools and youth organizations across the state, and worked to bring together about 1,000 young people at UIC in the fall of 2014. And the idea was really, it was right before we were electing a governor, the most recent gubernatorial election here in Illinois, to say, okay, we're going to be setting a new trajectory for our state. What do young people think that could look like? And again, higher education has come up again and again. Also, this year, we took that similar model, that idea of including young people in the process of really democratizing how we make decisions, and we applied it across the country. And we said, okay, it's 2016. We're about to go into a big presidential election. What are young people looking for out of that person? And also, what types of engagement and what types of policies would they want to see? And again, higher education figured right at the top. But really, the message that we heard from young people across the country and across Illinois as we did this is that what's most important is that it matters who writes the rules. So when we're talking education funding, and especially higher education funding, for example, higher education students and prospective students need to be a part of that conversation, because we found in every subject that it always makes the policy better. You get a chance to think about what you missed, or you get to stop unintended consequences, or you just get really great buy-in from everyone who's going to be a part of that process. So what we work with, what we would like to see, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have seen in Illinois, is we're really interested in college students coming together and saying, okay, we know we've had some trouble here in Illinois funding higher education. What is a way forward? We ourselves can be part of that conversation. We might have some really good ideas. But just a little groundwork, and I'm sure the representative can talk a little more about it. Over the last 2 years that we've been watching this and working with our partners, we've seen some troubling results in funding for higher education. And this is not just in the last 2 years. This really goes back for quite a few. So really, over the last several years, tuition at both 4-year and 2-year schools is going up, sometimes more than like 50% in maybe 5 to 8 years. And what's interesting is that for a lot of time, our state government and local government, we're still giving, like in total dollar amounts, we're actually giving a lot to schools. Unfortunately, it's just not all necessarily going to students. And I don't mean that people are stealing it, and I don't mean that schools are doing a bad job managing it. I just mean that simply costs have been rising to perform the education, but also to manage pensions and debt and other things that our universities have taken on. And the problem is that makes it still harder for the everyday student, and especially any new students or first-generation college students to make that leap and be a part of that process. So that's something we flagged for a couple of years. And then actually in the last 2 years, we've really seen a lot of budget turmoil. As you may know, for this last fiscal year in our state, we haven't been able to pass a budget. And that's hit a lot of areas very hard, not just education, but education is a big thing that our state government does, and therefore has seen a huge hit there as well. And so the real problem with that, and you've probably seen in the news, like different universities very close to closing their doors and things like that. Thankfully, we have a little bit of a reprieve there. There was a bill passed last week on Friday that gives about $600 million to sort of stop some of the worst of those effects. And so now what we're talking to students about is, okay, that's great. That was really important for us to even be able to finish out this year, move on to next year and things like that. But what about the last 5-10 years of disinvestment in the sense that less money that we've been able to give students to support their higher education? What about that can we think about moving forward? This gets us through the end of this year, but what about the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? And really, most importantly for us, how can students be a part of that process and help deciding what should be prioritized? How can we make this happen? Where should we get funds if they're necessary? Things like that. So we are here to work with students and encourage students at Moraine and throughout Illinois to join this conversation, which students across the country are having. This is not unique to Illinois. This is happening in many other states. And students have come up with many really creative solutions, including helping their universities take different looks at the programs they offer and the ways they spend their money, and including helping their states find new sources of revenue and encourage specific funding and focuses on higher education too. Community colleges are a really important pathway in Illinois, and in fact, they serve many low-income and first-generation students, sure, but also as the higher education landscape changes, and we watch that change from across the country, and as tuition gets more expensive, this is a really important route that is steadily growing and may become, the way everybody goes to college in the future. So. I'm sure we'll have time for questions later, and I'd love to tell you more about Roosevelt, but I will pass it on to the representative.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for the panelists. I always hate following the students because they're so much more eloquent and impressive, giving their stories and explaining why they're here, the effect of the problems with the budget that they're having on them. So I've done some other events with students around MAP, the Monetary Award Program, and you always think, well, there's hope for the future generation because the students we meet are so impressive, and this group is no different. And thank you all for taking the time to come to this. I honestly was not expecting this many students to be able to take time out of their day or interested enough in the topic to come out and hear us and hopefully get some feedback from you. So thanks for taking time out of your day. My name is Kelly Burke. I'm a state representative. I live in Evergreen Park. My office is in Oak Lawn. I represent Moraine Valley Community Colleges in my district. I also have a 4-year university, St. Xavier, which is also in my district. Before I became a representative, I worked in fundraising at St. Xavier, so I've got a good background in higher education, and I've been able to take that background and use it as chair of the Higher Education Committee. So on the Higher Education Committee, we deal not only with funding issues, but also public policy. So, for example, 2 bills that we just had last week would do, affordability is a huge issue, and there's obviously lots of programs to help people get through college a little bit quicker. So is anyone here, were you ever in a dual enrollment class in high school? Were you able to get college credit? Right, so that's becoming very popular, and then you can come into school with some credits and hopefully cut down on the amount of time you have to spend and the amount of money you have to spend in college. So there's also provisions. A lot of schools give prior learning credit. So let's say you were a vet or you were coming to college after being in the workforce for a long time. There's different classes that you can be credited with for having that life experience, but it's not uniform across the community college system. And so the group that that oversees community colleges is trying to standardize it so that somebody knows if you have veterans experience that it will be counted for X number of hours for these classes at all community colleges throughout the state. We're also trying to work to reduce the number of students who have to take remedial classes once they enter community college. And it could be someone who's coming right from high school who for whatever reason didn't get a good foundation in math or your writing or reading in high school, or it could be somebody who's returning to college after being many years away from having taken a math class, and they need to take remedial classes. And that, it slows down your progress. You have to pay for it, but it's not credit bearing. It can be a little demoralizing, thinking that you now you have to take these classes and it's going to slow you down. So we're trying to work with high schools as a way to make sure that people are who are kind of at risk for having to take remedial classes are kind of spotted in high school and really encouraged to take a fourth-year class, not necessarily in algebra, but maybe in statistics or accounting, and try and identify career paths that they might be interested so they can be kind of put on the right path so when they do get to whether they're going to a 4-year or to community college, that they're ready to hit the ground running instead of having to take remedial classes. So policy-wise, those are just a couple things we're working on. But we are obviously also working on funding. And I know I kind of saw the list of questions, so I know we'll get to a discussion about that. But this budget impasse we're in right now is unprecedented. And if you had asked me this time last year if we would be sitting around in April without a budget, I wouldn't have believed it. The reasons for why we're at this impasse are many. I have my version, which I will give to you, but you might speak to somebody else and they may have a different version, and I'll kind of make it quick. So I know we have a couple of political science people up here. I imagine there's a couple other people in the audience who are interested in political science, but the governor has an obligation to introduce a budget, which he did last year in February. And in his budget, specifically with higher education, he kept funding for community colleges about the same as the year before, kept funding for MAP, a little lower than the year before. But what he did was he put in a decrease in the amount of money going to public four-year universities, wanted to cut it by about 30%, 31% in fact. And you may be thinking, well, that doesn't really affect me because I'm at a community college. But I'm imagining that many of you are planning to go on to a four-year university and that many of you are looking at a public four-year university like UIC or U of I or ISU or Governor State. So if those schools have their funding slashed 31%, that has a huge impact on the services they can provide, the programs they can offer, the financial aid they can offer to students, all sorts of supports that would have to be reduced if that 31% cut were taken out. And there are many schools, not many, there are some schools that because they rely so much on support from the state that their institution would not be sustainable with a 31% cut. So there are other facets of the budget that the governor chose to cut, and there was a lot of disagreement. So at the end of the day, the legislature, which is, as you probably know, has a majority of Democrats in both chambers, passed a spending plan, so an appropriation bill that put forth our priorities. And one of our priorities was to keep higher education funding at the levels that it was in 2015. So we sent that bill to the governor. Admittedly, it was out of balance, but it was a statement of our priorities. So I'm going to do a little quiz here. Political science majors, can somebody tell me what is not unique, but distinctive about the governor's power in Illinois in terms of the veto? Does anyone know? Right, he can line item and reduce veto. So let's say, I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's say the bill went to him saying we're going to give $274 million to community colleges for their operating grants. If the governor thinks that's too much money, he simply has to cross out 274 and put in whatever number he thinks is adequate, 250, 230, whatever. You can do the same thing with every other line item in the budget. So what the governor did was chose not to exercise that line item and simply vetoed outright every single appropriation bill except for K through 12 education. Now, K through 12 education, as a statement of priorities, we had put in some additional monies from 2015. So the governor signed that bill but vetoed everything else and has not to date come back with a counteroffer. So I'm an attorney by profession. Anybody else here interested in becoming a lawyer? I know one. Raise your hands. Everybody wants to be a lawyer. Okay, good. So here's, you make an offer. Somebody else makes a counteroffer. You make another counteroffer. I mean, this is how negotiation happens. But once the governor vetoed those bills, there was no further negotiation. And it's been a very, very frustrating situation to be in because we are seeing what is happening. We're seeing the disinvestment. We're seeing schools that are suffering. Luckily, Moraine has a healthier balance sheet, and they've taken some steps along the way to be able to shore up their operations without impacting it too much, but they can't go on like that forever. They rely on state funding, just as some of the less well-off communities in southern Illinois. And it's at some point in the not too distant future, the better off institutions are going to be in the exact same place as the folks who right now are having such difficulties. So we've tried to come halfway. We tried to pass a bill, or we actually did pass a bill that funded MAP grants and community colleges. So the two things that the governor and we were in agreement pretty much financially on, we passed a bill that just funded those two things and left the 4 years out of it. That passed the legislature. The governor vetoed it. We tried to override the veto. That was a bill that I had, and we were unable to override the veto. So then we were back to square one. So the result is the partial bill that was passed last week, which by no means is perfect. I think people had a very hard time, deciding to get to that place because it's half a loaf. And we want to give you the whole loaf. But I think the other concern that people had was, while we're trying to get to the spot in the budget negotiations where we can give a full year's budget to schools and to human services providers and everyone who relies on state funding, what happens to institutions? And there are institutions that are in severe danger of closing, and that kind of made it even more of an emergency. So the result was the bill we passed last Friday. The governor signed it yesterday at $600 million worth of funding for community colleges, MAP grants, and four-year universities. The money should start flowing fairly soon, but it's only going to get us till July. And then the crisis rears its ugly head again. I'm hopeful that we will have a budget not only for the past year, but the upcoming year by July. But given how things have gone the past year, I can't say that with certainty. So on that cheerful note, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
So we have time for questions and comments. If you just raise your hand, I can come around with the microphone.
Hi, I've got a question / comment. I'm probably one of the oldest students in this room right now. I'm a 58-year-old sophomore. I've gone back to school. I've listened to all these people talking about budget cuts for education, budget cuts for the children, the young growing adults that are going to be the future of our country. They're cutting our education. So what can we be? They're cutting it so we can't be as smart as other countries. They're cutting it so they're going to be able to walk in and say, okay, I'm just going to take over because you guys we're not smart enough. Okay? I've come back to school. The last time I was in school was in 1979. I've come back with a goal. I'm going to get my associate's degree from this beautiful institution and then go on and become a deacon and help people, okay? That's me, okay? Everyone's talking about they're cutting the budgets, but are they cutting their own pocketbooks? Are they not getting raises? I kind of doubt that. Someone's still getting rich, and it's not us. It's not the people that need to be getting the funding so that we can step up and say, okay, we can be smarter than them. We can be productive. I mean, you guys up there, you're fantastic. What you've said up there, great. My question is, someone needs to wake up and smell the coffee and say, this is USA right in this room, okay? We are going to become the leaders, not the followers. That's my question. Thank you.
Well, we can do like this.
A question for Representative Burke and then the rest of the panelists as well. What we've seen lately over the last 10 years, in not only Illinois but across the United States, is that community colleges are becoming more characteristics of what the broader American landscape looks like. You know, more diverse students from many different types of backgrounds. And over the last 100 years, school has been compulsory up from K through 12. And what we're finding is education in the preschool and the community college levels drastically improve the economic spaces in communities that offer them. So the question is, do we place more emphasis on funding community colleges across the nation? Is that a possibility that is feasible? And what are your opinions on that from everybody? Thank you.
So in terms of funding community colleges, I think you're absolutely right. I think that the population or the usage of community college has really gone up nationwide. And it's used, depending on where you are, it's got different users. So a school like Moraine or College of DuPage has a very high group of people who are using it as a stepping stone to going to a to get their 4-year degree. But then you have a lot of people who are coming back as adult, as the previous speaker was, having been in the workforce and wanting to make a change, and so coming in to get some additional training. You have people who need certificate programs, so they don't even want or need an associate's, but they need certificates, or they're adding to something they already have. Stackable credentials, they call it, where you have one level and now you need the next level. So it's a very diverse group of people who use community colleges. Now, some regions downstate, it's a flip. It's many more people using the community college for more vocational job training, and fewer people using it as a stepping stone to a 4-year university. It just sort of depends on what the makeup of your population is. But clearly, we have a need to educate more people. So there is a goal that has been put out there across the U.S. to try and have 60% of the adult population of each state have an associate's degree, a 4-year or above degree, or a credential, a certificate that will lead to a meaningful career. And so right now, Illinois is actually pretty high in this, and it's one of our strengths that we have a fairly highly educated population, but about 44% of our adult residents have one of these affiliations. We need to get to 60 by 2025. Other states are starting from a much lower 30%, 32%, things like that. We are actually pretty high, but we're going to need to drive more people into higher education to do that. And it can't just be people who are coming out of high school, because that demographic is kind of getting smaller. We're kind of out of a baby boom and into just a smaller group of people. So we need to look at folks who have had a little bit of college but never finished, people for whom going to school would help their career but they never started college. So community college is the way to get those folks in, because it's relatively inexpensive, it's convenient. They're used to working with a population that works. So they have night classes, they make it easy, whereas four-year universities aren't always as adept at making things easy for returning learners. So I think we do need to keep funding community colleges. But community colleges are a little bit different than universities. So community colleges have three sources of income, basically: property taxes from the properties that are in their area, student tuition and fees, and then the state support. So whereas public universities have tuition and then the state support, they don't have that property tax basis. So it's the funding is a little bit different for community colleges. But I think in order to keep us on this trajectory, very positive trajectory that we're on, we need to keep sustainable funding for the community colleges.
What about a cooperation with the private industries? I know my son, he works at Champaign-Urbana. He just actually got a job at the university, a permanent job. He's been there for quite a while. And working with the private industry, the research working, and the community college. Like he's working at U of I Champaign, or the hospital, U of I, with the ophthalmology department, trying to institute this. Now I could see this happening in the community colleges, where there could be internships where the students could get money for tuition, or some other method where the students would be trained and be prepared when they get out in the field. They would have an internship and go right into a job, so they would have a job, and also some way that the private industry could support the colleges.
So I think that goes on a by school basis. I think so first of all, some private employers help develop or sponsor training programs at different community colleges. And I'm not 100% sure what the makeup is at Moraine, but there are some, and I'll just use this as an example. Let's say you're Caterpillar down in Peoria. They may have a link with their community college so that they can send folks over from Caterpillar for certain classes that are needed, to help Caterpillar advance. Doesn't mean other people can't take those classes, just, it's designed, the curriculum is designed in conjunction with the private employer. But in terms of the moving people into a career, I think that is something that is definitely needs to be done. I think internships, I know a lot of you who are hoping to do a 4-year, are starting to think, I should look for an internship. Should get an internship. They're sometimes difficult to find. Sometimes people want you to do it for free, which is not fair or easy, because I'm sure you have bills, you have obligations, you have tuition and whatnot. But some of it is having the community college make connections with their local employers and figure out how to funnel students who that employer needs, after they've had some training. So I don't know that it could be one model done on the state, for every community college. I think it's got to be the community colleges, who their local employers are, who they can make connections with, and what their students are looking to do.
Mm-hmm. So just to add on to this a little, because I think it's a really interesting topic. For Roosevelt students, this is actually something that they're working on across the country. And And they do it for different reasons in different places. So on the one hand, we have students that are working with their schools to create partnerships in their communities with local employers and things like that. They do this for a number of reasons. On the one hand, universities are very place-based organizations. We call them anchor institutions. And even when they're struggling for funding, they're really focused on where they are. Unlike a company, they're not likely to pick up and move to a new city. So they're invested in the ways that they spend their money and work to create those partnerships. So we, Roosevelt students, and this would be something that I'd be happy to work with any of you on, in other cities and other schools, have partnered with their universities and local businesses to create opportunities that both increase opportunities for students, like internships, things like that, create more sustainable environments on their campus, and create great pipelines for local service providers and businesses, local and women and minority-owned businesses as well, so that they can then do even more business with the university and the surrounding community. So this is just one of the ways I think that students actually can be really powerful in getting involved in shaping these discussions. So for example, if that seems like a really interesting and clear route forward for you, it's certainly something that I'm sure that your school and schools across the country would benefit from thinking through a model. They may be different school to school, but having students involved in crafting that is sort of essential to its success.
Okay, I just want to know, the purpose of this right here is to find a way to balance the budget and get more money for the school, right? If you're saying that the government is the one that denies your request, if everything, like, you guys send the request, he sees it, he denies it, he vetoes it, it's not worth anything, right? How will you say, how can we convince him to see, oh, okay, how can we convince him to give us some extra money?
So what the governor, so let's just lay out how we got where we are. So in 2011, Illinois has a flat income tax. So in 2011, the legislature increased the tax from 3% to 5%. So if you make $10,000, you were paying 5% on your income. If you made $1 million, you were paying 5% on your income. That's not how the federal tax rates work. They increase as your income goes up. But we have a flat tax. It's in our Constitution. So as I said, back in 2011, the legislature increased it from 3% to 5%. And then when they did that, they wrote into the law that the income tax increase would scale back in 2015 to 3.75%. It should go down in, I think, 2019 to 3.5, and it settles at 3.25. So if you're going from 5% to 3.75%, what happens to the amount of money you're collecting in income tax? It's going down, right? So Governor Quinn kind of ran for re-election on a platform of let's keep the income tax at 5%. And Governor Rauner, part of his platform was, I don't think we should keep it at 5%. So Governor Rauner wins. And what he says to the legislature is, I won, please don't do any last minute things while Governor Quinn is here, and please don't raise it up to 5%. I'll get in, we'll kind of work on it together. So in a show of good faith, that's what the legislature did. And so as a result, for the 15-year, we've got $4 billion less in tax revenue coming in than we did the year before. But many of our costs increase. So Medicaid, pensions, things like that, those go up no matter how much money you have. So we're in a situation where we have X expenditures and we've got X minus $4 billion in revenue. So the issue is, how do we get our revenues to match our expenditures? So you can do that two ways. You can make some cuts, you can raise revenue, or you can do a combination of both. And so far, the governor has said, I will only talk about raising any revenue if you make these different changes to the law that have nothing to do with the budget. And by that I mean the governor wants to get rid of collective bargaining. So for instance, your professors at Moraine Valley and most of the people who are employed here are in a union, and they collectively bargain with the university for their wages and their working conditions and their benefits. The governor would say, we shouldn't have that. It costs too much money, and it hamstrings the university's ability to control its finances. And he would say, let's just get rid of collective bargaining. Well, Democrats in the legislature are not okay with getting rid of collective bargaining. We feel it's a fundamental right, and we feel it's something that people should have the ability to do. The governor also wants to make some changes to workers' compensation, which probably isn't something you've all studied up on, but if you got hurt on the job and you were hurt, you had medical expenses, you lost wages, you can recover under workers' compensation. Well, the governor wants changes that would make it much, much harder for people to recover their lost wages and their medical benefits because they got hurt on the job. And then there are numerous other things that he wants that some are okay, some are not okay, but what he has said is he won't talk about any changes to revenue unless we pass those things that have absolutely nothing to do with the budget. So that's a little bit where this stalemate is coming from. But let's just say the governor was okay with raising revenue. We got to figure out where it's going to come from. So like I said, Illinois has a flat tax. There's proposals out there that would change it to a graduated income tax where people, the more you made, the more you would pay, up to a top tier of like 9%. So that's something, we have to ask people, is that what they would like? Yep.
Isn't it regular person's doing wasn't it 15 to 23% on whatever you make, money you get taken out of your taxes?
Well, that's on the federal level. So this would be in addition to. So right now when you get paid, they take out.
An extra tax, so we'll be getting double tax?
No. So right now you pay federal income tax and you pay state income tax. So there's a proposal out there to change the way we tax at the state level. So instead of it being one amount for everybody, one percentage for everybody, your percentage would be higher the more money you made, which is how they do it on the state. But to make it even more complicated, the flat tax is in our Constitution. So for Illinois to go to they call it a graduated income tax rate, you guys, voters, would have to say it's okay. And you'd have to do that it would be in a general election. So conceivably, it could be November 2016. There could be a question on your ballot saying, do you think Illinois should change from a flat tax to a graduated tax? And here are the rates. And you, voters, would get to decide whether or not that is something you think is a good idea. There's, like anything else, pros and cons. The biggest pro from the revenue side is that it's projected to bring in about $1.5 billion extra, more money than is currently being brought in today. The downside is some people would pay more than they're currently paying. Most of those people are at the income level above about $750,000. For most people below $750, depending on how the rates go, you'd actually pay about the same amount in taxes or perhaps even less. But there's pros and cons. So that is something that's being proposed. There's also changes you could make to a lot of corporate taxes, a lot of loopholes that are currently, where someone can take advantage of a deduction. This is mostly on the corporate level. And if you put enough of those together, you can bring some more money back into the state, which could then be used for things like higher education, human services, things like that. So sorry to be so long-winded, but these are not simple topics.
Okay.
So how many of you in here know who I am? Anybody? I'm actually your current student trustee, so get used to seeing me around campus. So I want to ask every student here a question. How many of you personally receive funding, financial aid through the state of Illinois through the MAP grant? Just two? Some back there? Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to put a face on this issue and see how many of you are actually being affected. this lady here from the Roosevelt Institute actually made an interesting point, which was you said that the reason why the money's not going as far is because you mentioned a list of issues. One of them was pensions. How much of an issue is pensions in terms of the budget for schools and colleges and universities?
Do you know the number offhand?
So it's absolutely huge, and let me just clarify that it's not when you're paying for a pension. There's the amount you pay. They call it the normal cost, what it costs for a year to pay the employer's part of someone's pension. That's not what the big number is. What has happened over the past 40, 50 years is that the state has not paid. So the state is responsible for paying for the employer's share of universities and community colleges. So for many, many different reasons, the state decided not to pay as much as they should. And the result was an unfunded liability that's now over $100 million. So it's just like, you buy something on a credit card. Let's say you spent $100 on your credit card, right? And then you only paid off $40 the next month. Well, you've got 25% interest building on that $60, and that builds and builds and builds. So how much you end up actually paying for that $100 purchase, the more you put off actually making the full payment, it builds and builds and builds. So as a result, we're in a situation now where we spend about 22% of all the tax money that we bring in is spent paying for pensions, for the unfunded liability of pensions, not so much the year to year. So it is a huge, huge expense. And there was a law passed a couple years ago that tried to tweak some of the pension benefits to bring that, so we could bring that annual number down, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional. So we are obligated to make those payments. And making those payments is crowding out funding for other things such as higher education, human services, anything else the state does. Is that helpful? It explains it. It's not helpful in that it doesn't solve the problem.
And I would just say that one of the things that our students do on campuses across the country, which is really interesting and unique, and really takes a strong partnership with their schools as well, is they take a look into the finances of their schools and try to really understand this for themselves, and also see if they can help their school make a few better investments. So for example, when we're talking about things like pensions, along that line, you also have endowments and other things, other large financial decisions that universities have to make, just like the state of Illinois does. In many cases, they're also state employees. And students can really be helpful there by combing through the records for the last 10, 15 years, and pointing out, we've done research and looked at different financial deals that universities enter into frequently, just like cities have and just like states have, that have created some of these problems. And students have actually offered some really creative ways to move forward and change that. So for example, there's a number of financial deals that both universities and cities entered into in the 1990s, which seemed like really great deals. It seemed like a really great way to make an investment with the dollars of the school, whether it was an endowment or whether it's a future pension payment you have to make that you're hoping makes a little money so you can kind of spread that money further. And they looked really safe, and they looked like they had all sorts of safeguards, but totally unexpectedly lost a lot of money in 2008. And so our students have actually taken a look at those swap deals, as they're often called, and offered some creative opportunities for how their universities could reevaluate that and actually gain more money for students and take back some of that funding that's currently going to pay for debt and pensions and not doing the day-to-day needs that we need it to on our campus.
Could reframe the earlier question. In the budget standoff between Governor Rauner and those in the legislative branch, what do you think students can do to help people like you who are advocating so strongly for higher education spending? Other than waiting till November to vote, what other actions might students be able to do to help you?
So I would say what I have seen students doing in the last 3 or 4 months has been absolutely powerful. It started, I think, right after the MAP funding bill and the community college funding bill passed, and a lot of schools started. I think you have it, the hashtag Fund My MAP or Fund My College. Eastern Illinois was instrumental in kind of starting this. They are one of the schools that is in the most dire straits, and their student associations really started a very powerful social media campaign, reaching out to their legislators, really just getting the word out. And a lot of the private colleges, they have a group that coordinates a lot of the private colleges in Illinois, and they got a lot of their members to get their students to start contacting their legislators and really pushing the issue. And to a lesser extent, some of the other four-year universities have done that as well. So there was just a big rally in Springfield on Wednesday, I believe, and there were close to 1,000 students who came down, protested at the Capitol, had a rally. There have been a lot of employee groups too, because don't forget, it's not just you guys. It's the people who teach you, the people who work in the library, the people who work in the cafeteria. They are all dependent on their institutions as well. This is where they work. This is where they've decided they're going to make their careers, and they're just as vested in making sure that these places are solvent and strong, not just solvent, but strong and thriving. So I would say keep that up, because the more people hear from the students, the more people hear from people affected, the more likely they are to keep the issue of the rest of the funding for FY16 on the forefront. So squeaky wheel gets the oil. That is true in life, and it is especially true in budget negotiations.
I want to add some of the things that Roosevelt students are doing across the country on this and other issues. Students are incredibly powerful on things like this. So for example, this event today was orchestrated by a student on your campus. Things like this are incredibly helpful at getting more students involved, taking this message from here then to your families who are other voters and other people that can keep this up. Are all things that started because a student comes together and put on an event like this. Through our Next Generation Blueprint, which is that survey that I was talking about, that's really a national survey that highlights education and even higher education funding. Students are taking this to their representatives and several state representatives wherever they live, and asking them to prioritize their issues, and more importantly, to engage young people in the process of writing the rules. And this would be a great opportunity for you as students to do the same. It's really wonderful to have Representative Kelly Burke here, and there are so many others in the legislature that, whether or not you may be their constituent, and even if you're not, they care about higher education funding, and I think would be happy to hear from you and make that kind of a commitment to say, I care about bringing young people into this process and taking their ideas seriously. Additionally, with Roosevelt, and I'm sure with many other student organizations here, you can be a part of thinking through, researching, and coming up with some possible policy ideas. That's really what we think is a great way for students to be involved. A lot of times when students are asked to get involved in politics, it's sometimes it's for really passionate things like a rally or a powerful demonstration or something like that. But a lot of times it's also tedious and paperwork. It's like walk around, knock on doors, just vote once every couple of years. There are really meaningful ways that you can be involved and that you can provide your voice by researching and writing your own ideas, which we have dozens of, and would love to have yours as well. So please feel free to talk to me about that too.
I think we have time for just a couple questions.
Well, not so much a question, but a comment. I wanted to go back on the tax thing that you mentioned, and also about involving young people and just people in general. I think graduated tax, that would be great. That'd be ideal, but I find it really hard to happen just because of the sheer amount and change of legislation that we'd have to do. So the flat tax, that'd be the first thing we could tackle, you know. I mean, what is it now? You said it dropped back down to 3.25, was it? 3.75? It dropped from 5, right? So I think we have to educate people in general that higher taxes are not necessarily a bad thing. I'm gonna give this example. Anybody that's in the political science class with me would already know it, but if you're not, it's the example of Denmark. And I know we're not Denmark, you know, I know we're not a country like, you know, we're a way bigger country, but these people have free college, free healthcare, you know, 5 weeks vacation. These people have it made, and why is because they pay 50% in taxes. You guys think that's crazy, but I mean, it's higher taxes are not necessarily a bad thing. You know, we have to educate people. I think, you know, 5% taxes aren't bad, seeing as, you know, because they dropped to 3.25, we have, you know, goods and services are more expensive. Like you said, healthcare is more expensive. They need that's the, you know, root almost of the problem, that, you know, they need to cut the funding because they don't have the money to do it because of the drop in revenue from the tax decrease. So I think, you know, just educating people, you know, like a little bit higher taxes is not always a bad thing. I know the example of Denmark is a little bit out there because, like I said, you know, demographics are different. Of course, we have to take that into account. But it's just a good example that higher taxes are not always bad, you know?
Final question, got 2.
I just wanted to start out by saying thank you all for coming here, and especially Representative Burke. A question I wanted to ask was, you know, it really breaks my heart for all of us to be sitting here while not having a state budget, and to see, you know, Republicans blame Democrats and Democrats blame Republicans, while it's at the expense of us, the students, and at the expense of our educators. What I wanted to ask is, do you feel that the House Democrats could have done something differently to work with the governor to help pass a budget?
So I think what happened Friday was an indication of people trying to come together on admittedly an extremely narrow issue of higher education funding. But that was a bipartisan effort. And for this small, limited purpose, the governor dropped his obsession with ending collective bargaining and making all these other changes that I think would hurt working people and hurt middle-class families. So for the purposes of this, he dropped that. And I think what it showed was that if we focus on the budget and what people need, then we're able to come together. If he continues to insist that all these things, I mean, when I say they have nothing to do with the budget, I mean they have no impact on the state budget. And that's what I think is holding up a lot of this. So yes, I think we can work together, but I think it's been made difficult by this insistence. And I'll make a comparison that I've made before. And some of you may remember, you know, I talked about pensions a little bit earlier. We passed a law in 2013. I came to the legislature in 2011. That's all we talked about for 2 years. Pensions. What do we do about pensions? How do we handle this? The amount is growing out of control. What do we do? And it took 2 years and a lot of advocacy by Governor Quinn and a lot of other people to get 60 people to agree to change pensions. Now, changing the pensions had a direct impact on the bottom line to the state budget. If that law had actually been allowed to go through, we would have paid about $1.3 billion less into the pension system each year. So for 3 years, we would have had $1.3 billion more dollars to be using for other things. So a direct impact to the state government. At no point in those negotiations did Governor Quinn say, you know what, if I don't get my way on pensions, I'm not discussing a budget with you guys. He never said that because it's not how you govern. We've got obligations to pass a budget. And even though it was a direct impact and it was something that he was very, very passionate about, he was able to pursue that agenda outside of the budget and ultimately be successful. And if Governor Rauner would like to pursue his collective bargaining and workers' comp changes outside of the budget, maybe he will ultimately be successful. I don't know, but he should not be holding up the budget in order to try and achieve those changes.
We have one more question.
Hi. I know we're talking about, obviously funding, but I'm just curious, and this kind of goes to Ms. Conway, right? Kind of to your point of what students are doing. I'm just curious at the state level, is anybody looking really at the fiscal responsibility aspect on the part of the schools? Because I'm an advisor here. I also teach political science. And for 10 years, we've had update sessions where the universities come in and we keep hearing about, oh, we just built this amazing new dorm. We just built this amazing new gym. We know enrollment's declining. We see schools spending tens of millions of dollars on these new facilities that really don't impact learning. We're in the middle of this 10-month budget stalemate, and yet Champaign-Urbana just signed Lovie Smith to a $21 million football contract. And no one's batting an eye at these things. So I'm just curious, aside from students through like the Roosevelt Institute, is anybody really looking at this at the state level?
So I will tell you that yes, and I will tell you that the changes to the physical structure and amenities and supports that are on campus at all levels, including the community college, are much, much different than they were 30 years ago. So I graduated from the University of Illinois in 1988, and it is a different place. Anyone who went to Illinois State University 30 years ago and has been down there recently can attest that there are very positive physical changes to that campus. And I will tell you, Moraine Valley looks a lot different today than it did 30 years ago. And part of that is a realization that students need and want some of these extra things. It's also some competition. Chicago, for four-year traditional students, is one of the most hotly competed for group. I'm not even saying that right. Traditional students, college or high school graduates, because we're in the middle of the country, and other states are in the same. They have declining numbers of students as well. They are all coming to Chicago and trying to get our students to go other places. And to do that, they have lovely campuses, and they're offering lots and lots of financial aid and scholarships, and they are luring Illinois students to Iowa, to Missouri, to Kentucky, to all over the place, to Indiana. And in some respects, we I shouldn't say we, the universities feel a need to keep up with that. So that being said, I think when we're actually working with the Illinois Board of Higher Education to kind of assess where the changes in spending have gone over the past 10 years, and looking at whether those are going to things that directly support students, in what areas are they going into, financial aid, intercollegiate athletics. I mean, you can argue about whether we should be putting money into intercollegiate athletics, but it does benefit the students, there are student supports nowadays that were not there 30 years ago. There are so many more services for students who have learning disabilities. There's so much more support for veterans, for students with physical disabilities. It's just more money is spent on different things than 30 years ago. But that doesn't mean we still don't continue to drill down and make sure money is being spent properly. And I think you're absolutely right.
Sorry, Susan. The last thing I would say on that note is that, as Roosevelt students, as our students look into their school's finances and help understand what's there and look for ways forward, by recognizing those patterns, they find really amazing leverage points. And whether it's that you go to your university maybe has some money and you'd like them to kind of get on board with a change you're looking to make, or whether you think that the money's been mismanaged, recognizing that and making allies there has led to some really powerful change. So our students have been involved in things like like if you look at what happened in Mizzou this last year, and on the East Coast, several changes, including changing the names of and figureheads on universities. So when students take a look at their finances and they have an understanding of what's going on, they can also help identify whether or not they think certain spending is within their priorities and try to realign that. Mostly, I think that, I tend to believe that everybody's doing their best and that schools are really, doing what they can to make ends meet in difficult situations. But it always helps for students to know exactly how that money is spent, and they have a tremendous power to either change that or just use that as a strong selling point for what else needs to happen at their school.
Okay, with that, and I'm sorry because I see there's a couple other questions. I have one other question, if you don't mind, for Kelly. One of the things that the governor said with the bill that was passed on Friday was the reason that he is willing to sign off on it was that it was fully funded. And I'm just wondering, going into our next budget, what are the resources that we're looking, or the funds that we're looking to pull for funding for higher education? I mean, I don't even know if that's a valid question, but that's what his argument is, that was fully funded, that's why he's going to. So how do we present a budget with higher education fully funded? Is there ideas going on, or?
Right. And when you start talking about the budget, unless you're really into it, people's eyes start to glaze over. So this is another slightly complicating factor. So in the so I told you about how the governor vetoed all the budget bills except K through 12 education, right? Remember that? So what happened in that aftermath is that employee groups, unions representing different employees that work for the state, once July 1st came and we didn't have a budget, they went to court and they said, hey, federal judge, please make sure that we continue to be paid in absence of an appropriation. And the governor's office didn't fight that. And in fact, they entered into an agreed order that allowed all state employees to be paid at the same rate that they were paid in FY15. So no changes to the number of people employed nor their salaries. And so that money going out the door, K through 12 money going out the door. In addition, a huge part of our budget is spent on Medicaid, not only health services, for people who receive Medicaid insurance, but also nursing home. A lot of people who are in nursing homes it's paid for by Medicaid, and a lot of folks who are developmentally disabled, their living arrangements and their care is paid for by Medicaid. So it's it's probably next to education, it's probably our biggest expense. So over the years, there have been different court cases where somebody said, okay, the state isn't doing X for Medicaid, and they went into court and got a court order that said that the state had to do whatever it was they wanted them to do. So the state was operating under what they call consent decrees, where ultimately they came to an agreement and they were providing services based on these consent decrees. So once there was no budget, in all of these cases, which are all in federal court, the advocates who originally brought the cases went back into court and got orders that said the state has to continue paying under the consent decree for a wide variety of Medicaid services until there's a budget. So between the K through 12 education, the Medicaid going out the door, and the payment of state employees, 90% of what we were hoping to generate is being paid on autopilot. And so there is very little for the remaining 10%, which is basically every other function of the state, corrections, state parks, the Secretary of State's office, higher education, and a variety of human services that aren't paid for by Medicaid. So mental health centers, some substance abuse centers, rape crisis centers, Meals on Wheels, things that are funded by Catholic Charities. These are all things that are not receiving their money and are closing down every single day. It's beyond shameful. And so your original question, Susan, I think, is how do we look at full funding for the next year? So right now what we can look to is the governor's introduced budget, which repeats many of the cuts that he sought in the FY16, including a reduction in the four-year public universities, not quite at 31%, but still at an extremely significant clip. So that's what he's presented. We're in the middle of budget hearings. It's a little surreal to be having a budget hearing for a year in which we haven't had a budget, but we're trying, again, to assess priorities and still have the conversation of how we're going to pay for all that.
I know that there's many people who had questions we didn't have time to get to you. I want to respect our speaker's time. And at this time, for closing remarks, I want to turn it over to our Vice President of the Political Activists Club, Valerie Razzo.
All right, so I would like to just thank everybody for coming out today, and I would like to especially thank Kelly Burke and Brenna Conway for being advocates for higher ed. So if we can please give them a round of applause. And as a small token of our appreciation, we would like to give you this small gift. All right, and if you could please join the conversation on Twitter, just use the hashtag #FundMyCollege, and just to let our legislators know the importance of our education and that we want to better our future. So thank you all again.